we've got this kind of main heading about achieving academic excellence for all. And I think that is key for me. It really is something that touches all students. All students can excel, from EAL learners to learners who are monolingual students as well, can all excel using the language-based, as it says there in the subheading, the language-based pedagogy, to enable those outcomes for everyone to be optimised. And the focus being on subject disciplines. So this is an approach to developing literacy skills across the school curriculum that very much lies at the heart of the subject discipline, so that mainstream subject teachers can see the benefit of how they can develop the language of their subject discipline. So we'll have a look at, these are a few comments flipping up onto the screen about that teachers have made about the less successful aspects of students writing at A level in geography and in history. So you may be familiar with some of these from your context, and I would say that you will probably say similar things about writing, certainly the teachers I work with, writing at GCSE and IGCSE levels. They're saying similar things about the kinds of problems that are happening in terms of students writing. So some of those will probably, be similar to things you've experienced yourself. And one of the issues, I think, is, and one of the main thrusts of the course, is this spoken and written challenge that we have in school. And it's encapsulated in these two things, these two speech bubbles I've got here. This is one that a science teacher said, who I work with. It's a nightmare because so many of the pupils just write like they talk, okay? And then this is something that one of the pupils, 15-year-old pupil, said. Miss, I'd like to learn to talk more like a scientist would, but I don't reckon the teacher talks much like a scientist would most of the time either. So here we've got encapsulated in these comments, this challenge. How do we move pupils from the very informal spoken language of the, everyday life and what they might be speaking like in the community and the home, to the more technical registers of language that we'd want scientists and historians, etc., geographers, literary critics to be able to use. So this underpins the course. It's Halliday's spoken and written continuum. So the linguist Michael Halliday understood, he was a teacher himself actually, he understood the increasing demands made on children as they make their way from the spoken side of their linguistic repertoire to the written side of their linguistic repertoire that's demanded when they're in school. So he says, here I'm simply moving along a continuum which anyone familiar with English usage can readily interpret as spoken and written wholes. And we're going to have a little example here. So this is again from some of the work that I've done in history in school. So we've got a question, why did William win the Battle of Hastings? And this is what someone said in the classroom. He won because he was good at getting stuff prepared and also at leading his men, and he was actually quite lucky too. Okay, so when pupils come to produce a written answer or a more formal spoken answer to this question, this is what a pupil in year 7, so 11-year-old pupil said. I'm going to give 3 reasons why William won the Battle of Hastings in 1066. He was well prepared, good at leading his army, and lucky. And I said to the history teacher, what do you want them to be able to write? That pupil, what do you want the pupil to be able to write? And the teacher said, I want them to write this. Good preparation, good leadership, and good luck were the key factors that led to William's victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. So here we've got really nicely illustrated this shift across this continuum, the spoken and written continuum. And we're going to have a look at how the course teaches us as teachers to understand how language shifts and how as teachers we can make this shift very visible and therefore very doable for our pupils as well. So underpinning the course is understanding language as registers. So we're using this continuum in order to show that we can understand the register of language we use as a shift from, for example, in terms of what we're talking about or the field, this move from more everyday, concrete topics to more technical, abstract topics. In terms of who we're communicating with and the kind of tenor, therefore, we might have to use, shifting from an informal, personal, novice tone of language to a more formal, impersonal and informed form of language. And then in terms of how or the mode, moving from the most spoken here and now action accompanying language mode to the more written, generalized form where language is the text and we have to structure it so that it achieves its particular purpose. So these variables in the register, the what, the who, the how, or the field, the tenor, and the mode, are really crucial to understanding how we help pupils make the shift. And if we go back to our example, we'll have a look at how. So we've got our task, and we also have the genre identified clearly. So this is a factorial explanation. So the pupil's trying to explain the factors that led to the victory, William's victory at the Battle of Hastings. So if we look at the field first, we can see here that the pupil uses the word because when trying to create this cause and effect link. When they shift across, the pupil refers to reasons. So you've changed this linking word, this conjunction, into a noun. But when we move across further to the right, we've now got factors. So we've got the concept, the historical, technical word that we want here, the factors. This is what we call nominalized language. We've shifted from words that aren't nouns on the left-hand side to words that are nouns, technical nouns on the right-hand side. So let's have a look at how this happens a little bit further. So we've got the next bit, good at getting stuff organised. So then he moves to that being well prepared, which shifts again. We convert this to a thing, a noun, a big concept. We're looking at good preparation. When the pupil talks about getting his men to do what he wanted, then he moves to good at leading his army, and that shifts to this nominalization, this big noun now converted again to a thing, this leadership, good leadership. And then he was actually quite lucky. When we move across, we can see he had quite a lot of luck. And now we're converting to this big thing at the end, the victory. So we've got this very clear shift. In terms of the tenor, or how the pupil is interacting with the audience in this text, we can see at the beginning he's using very informal language. I think he's got words like stuff and quite. When he moves across, we don't have the kind of more the stilted I think. He's very clear, I'm going to give, but he's still talking from the first person at this point. He's still got quite a lot of luck, but when he moves across to the right, he's taken himself out and focused on these concepts and good preparation, good leadership and good fortune. So we have got more formal language and we've taken out the very personal that was there before. So the relationship with the audience has shifted. And when we look at the mode and the way in which the pupil structures the text, we can see that this pupil is bringing people to the front of sentences. We've got he, we've got focusing again on he. So he's focusing on people. When he moves across, at least we know who these people are because he's again referring to himself, but then he identifies William. So we have got a shift here. But when we move across to the right completely, we can see that what's foregrounded is not the people and not the writer, but the concepts, the historical concepts of good preparation, good leadership, and good fortune are foregrounded. So these are brought to the front of the text. So when pupils understand some of these key features of the language and how it moves from the spoken mode the informal spoken mode to the technical written mode, then we have a powerful vehicle for language development within subject disciplines. And this is an extract, actually, a screenshot from one of the pages in the course. You can see here, this is looking at a historical recount genre. And you can see really clearly also how useful it is in terms of looking at assessment for learning, because we can see that we've got a beginning level here in terms of how a pupil might write this historical recount, and then a satisfactory level, what the language might look like. Then we might have an expected level, what would be appropriate for that particular year group. And then we've got the beyond expected level and what the language looks like there. And the course gives you an opportunity to dig down deeply into the way in which language is working at those different levels to make this shift from the left of the continuum to the right. And I'm going to show you an example of how this is a teacher who very kindly let me use this. This is Matthew Tomlinson. He's the head of history at the Lycée International in Paris. And he's been using these tools with his OIB history students. So he's applying his knowledge from the course to looking at how they might structure their responses, because they were very much along the lines of what we saw happening at the beginning in some of those comments at the beginning of the presentation. So he's looking at how the policy of appeasement affected international relations in the 1930s. And you can see in red how this nominalised language has been used in the introductory paragraph to set up how the text then unfolds, to set up how it is structured. And he's doing a kind of where next type activity. So we've got these nominalised language. So we've got the impact, we've got militarism, we've got bankruptcy, and we've expanded those nominalisations to include a profound and disastrous impact, an era of aggressive militarism, the bankruptcy of the world order. So we have a look at where they go next. So he's taking information from the introductory paragraph and showing pupils how they can use it to clearly structure what they do next in terms of their writing. And he's got, they write a section on Britain and France, a section on the era of aggressive militarism, and a section on the bankruptcy of the world order. And he shows them then, through looking at exemplar or model texts, how they might use this structuring to enable them to have really clear topic sentences, to foreground that information in the topic sentence. And you can see here, we're linking very clearly to the introduction. And he shows them how this all forms the position statement, which has these sections within it, a bit of background information, and then they state the position and preview the arguments. And then they've got their 3 arguments clearly laid out, with the subphases, the elaboration and the cause and effect sequences, and inclusion of quotes and examples where relevant. So all of which is reinforced in the position statement at the end. So he's got this very clear structuring of this response. And within that, I mean, a lot of work went into each of the elements so that pupils were able to construct the various parts. But what we can see here is not a situation where you might see language, if we look at this car analogy, as all these separate bits that you might kind of bolt on. In order for this car to function well, all of the bits have to work together. And so seeing kind of language as something that is separate, that you might have to do a bit on this and a bit on this and a bit on this. The course enables us to develop our thinking around language and to see language as the key, the heart of the construction and communication of disciplinary knowledge, working where all the parts work together to make that vehicle really function well, really effective. This is a lovely quote from Michael Halliday. I always go back to this because I think it's so pertinent to what the course is trying to do and what we as teachers are trying to do. If knowledge is construed in language, then those who want to open up access to such knowledge not only must themselves understand, but must also enable learners to understand how it is that language does its work within all of the different subject disciplines. And one of the ways in which the course enables teachers to scaffold pupils' learning from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of that register continuum is by having a very explicit pedagogy. So this pedagogy focuses on a cycle, and the cycle is used at the stage of both at the level of an activity, at the level of a lesson, at the level of a unit of work, and at the level of curriculum design. So we set the context, we model and deconstruct, we guide pupils and jointly construct texts so that they're able to do so independently themselves at the end. And we look in quite some detail at how we might use that teaching and learning cycle, which is built on the way in which we all learn things from child development research. Actually, this is the way in which we learn anything as human beings applied to the educational setting. So we use the scaffolded cycle. We use the register continuum in lots of ways to enable pupils to confidently make disciplinary meanings. And this is a lovely example from, this is Alistair Clark, who's a Year 9 physics teacher. And he wanted pupils to interpret a graph. And he asked them what it showed. And he said, and someone said, "It goes up, sir." And then he just drew a line underneath very spontaneously. "Right," he said, "we need to shift across because the register of that language isn't what a scientist, it isn't how a scientist would want it expressed." And then he moved them across, and you can see that eventually they go through the bigger the resultant force, the bigger the acceleration, and then they move further. Acceleration is directly proportional to resultant force. And through dialogue, they manage to jointly construct the more technical meanings. So using that register continuum confidently is something that will come about as a result of the course. Also, appreciating language as a system of choices is often, it's liberating to see language as a system of choices, and the way in which the system of choices might vary according to your subject discipline or the task that you're giving pupils. So, for example, in English, pupils might be writing a story about a journey, and in terms of language, you might have many choices that you can use, almost infinite, isn't it, if you gave them a task like that. However, if in science you want them to explain how nitrogen oxides are made in a car engine, the choices are much more limited. You can't bring in lots of language from all over the place. There are certain things and ways in which scientists want you to be able to explain this. And so where those choices are more limited, that is where we need to think about how we scaffold pupils towards being able to make the right choices with language for the particular task they've been asked to do. I would say probably this type of task from history might fit somewhere in between. There aren't as many choices as you'd have with English, but there are more than you would have with writing an explanation about how nitrogen oxides are made in a car engine. And then, of course, this is one from maths. The choices are very restricted here, aren't they? You have to have certain things in place in order for this to be able to be calculated accurately. Okay, so understanding the system of choices within the language is really helpful. So to draw those things together, we can develop teacher knowledge about language that directly impacts pupils' outcomes within subject disciplines. And these are the things that teachers can learn on a pathway themselves almost. So in terms of genre within their subject, at a basic level, they will know the purposes and basic structures of their key subject genres, but they can move across and develop professionally to be able to think about genres in this way, where they're combining and manipulating genres for critical, creative or other purposes. In terms of understanding about the field, the content that they're teaching, the topics, distinguishing between everyday, specialised and technical vocabulary might be a starting point, but eventually recognising how vocabulary works within and across sentences to influence the technicality of a text is something that will be within teachers' grasp, having gone through the course. In terms of how you might relate to the audience with a given text, teachers will identify the audience and level of formality of a text, and they will move towards understanding how those aspects of language affect the tone of a text and its relationship with the audience in much more depth. And then in terms of the mode, or how language communicates meanings, knowing some of the basic language features that glue a text together, make it cohesive, for example, the use of pronouns, the use of conjunctions, teachers move towards being able to assess how language and other meaning-making resources work together to achieve a text flow, looking at the multimodal elements as well, the visual that comes into play when looking at how texts work. So that's kind of really, coherent pathway to developing a deeper understanding of knowledge of how language works to make subject disciplines knowledge and communicate that knowledge is really powerful within the course. This is a teacher who did a lot of work on using TEMC based approaches, and these are just, I'll let you read some of the things that he says. This is Mark Rayner, a PE teacher at a school in Birmingham in the UK. I think it's really powerful, where he says at the end, you can't disconnect the language and the subject content. So he's understood that they're interrelated, they're integral to each other, that you can't divorce the one from the other. And you can have a look, if you want to look in more depth, at the way the teachers have used that within their context. The Open University did some research in that school, and there's a link there that you can go on and have a look at. You just need to register for free, and then you can see some of the work and in action, if you like. So this is the PE department, Mark's PE department. They did the training in 2011. In 2012, they started to embed it in their department. And you can see that in terms of the results were really, really low in 2011. Very quickly, after starting to embed it, they improved significantly, and within the next 2 years they'd exceeded national standards, and by 2017 they were in the top 7% nationally in terms of progress in that subject in the UK, and they've continued since then. That's when they hit 95%, and they've never really looked back. In the course there's an article which explains this, which is some of the outcomes in history that were seen from the work that was done. So this is using TEMC based approaches in history in year 8, and when the school aggregated the progress, they found that it was double, in 2 terms, it was double the progress for the whole of the previous year, which in John Hattie's effect sizes, it shifts from 0.4 to 0.88, and it was even greater in science. So that's just an example of some of the impact it can have. So just to round up, how is TEMC designed? You have supporting videos, you have PowerPoints, snippets of which I've shown you today. There are readings which support and consolidate some of the learning that goes on in the modules. There is a tutor manual, which the tutor obviously will be working through, and then the participant manual alongside that. And in between each module, there are activities which enable trainees to apply the learning to their particular context, depending on how you organise the running of the course within your particular context. So I would say, to avoid, forgive the pun, a perfect pairing for me as a teacher, disciplinary teaching and learning and the language-based pedagogy of TEMC go together absolutely seamlessly. And I've just ended on a quote by the authors, Brian Dare and John Polias. They say, on so many occasions over the years, we've seen teachers thrilled and motivated by seeing for themselves the benefits to be enjoyed by both teacher and students when learning about language becomes central to teaching and learning. And I would certainly say that for me as a teacher for many years, this has been precisely my experience. So thank you. So we're able to take some questions around the course. There are a couple of things I would like to just briefly elaborate on. Some things that we're often asked, and that is, you know, why teachers working with EAL students need to know about how language works. Why is this particularly important? And what I would say is that knowing about language, I think, is important, first of all, for all students, but absolutely critical for EAL learners, because the knowledge of each subject discipline is constructed through and communicated through language primarily, but often in combination with other elements such as the visual. And the more we understand as subject practitioners about how language does its work within those disciplines, as you saw in the presentation in some of the little illustrations from different subjects there, then the better able we are to make that visible to our students so that they are equipped to take on and be apprenticed in the knowledge and the way in which that knowledge is communicated within the subject, so they have those skills themselves. And then I would say because there's such a huge difference between the way in which subject disciplines use language and the way in which language is used in the home and community, pupils have a really big long journey to make because of that mismatch. So in school, making that journey towards technical registers of language in itself is a tough journey. But if you have a different language at home that you're using, that is not the language of instruction, the journey's even longer, isn't it? You've got an even bigger mismatch. So enabling pupils to make that journey from wherever their starting point is something that is really well catered for within this scaffolded pedagogy within the course. Does anyone have any other things they would like to pick up on in relation to that? Please do feel free to unmute and ask any particular questions around that.
Can I just ask about the length of the course, please?
Yes. The length of the course?
Yes, please.
Okay, so TEMC has 9 modules. The modules vary in length. Some modules are 3 hours, some are 2.5. And these modules can be done you can do 2 modules on a day, for example, if you wanted to, or as I more usually do, spread the modules out. So we have a module and then an opportunity to apply the learning, and then we do another module. So we spread them out across. But there are 9 modules in total. Would you like to add anything, Srishti? You've recently had been training, haven't you, in your context?
Yes, so I did the train the teacher course. So I did the I'm a TEMC tutor. So ours was a bit more intensive. We did have the same 9 modules, but we did them over a matter of 5 days.
Yeah.
So, and we were taken through it was amazing because yes, we did not go into the exact detail of each activity, but we ended up covering everything. There was nothing that felt that was left out. And we basically also we had to wear 2 hats at the same time. We had to wear the tutor's hat of when we would deliver the module, and we also had to wear the participant's hat as if we are the teacher being trained to those modules. So I think the length would be dependent on whether you're doing the tutor course or whether you're doing the teacher course. If you're doing the teacher course, as Helen said, it would be a bit more spread out because you would have time to finish each module in a much comprehensive manner and try to apply those strategies directly into your classroom before you move on to the next, so that you can interact with it, ask your questions if you have any. However, if you were to do the tutor course, you would still have the opportunity to ask questions and interact with the the strategies, but not directly apply them immediately to your classrooms, because you would also you'll also be learning how to train your own teachers. which is why I think, me personally, I think that someone who has experience within the EAL teaching would actually benefit more from the TEMC tutor course rather than doing the teacher course, because their fundamentals are right up there. So they would understand where is your register, what's your tenor, what's your field, and all the little chunks of little different language, all those technicalities in there.
When I did the tutor course, it was the same. I did a 5-day block, and I think that if we run the course, if Lexis runs the tutor training course, it's always as a 5-day block. When you're then a tutor trainer, then you would run the training in school and you would spread it out. Yeah.
Sorry, so if I may, so that's the thing, what we're trying to bring to GIS, we want to host the tutor training,
right?
So that we're training teachers who can then go into their schools, or we can collaborate as schools who are near each other to train, to train a whole bunch of people. I think the other thing is the cost effectiveness of it, because I think this is something that you haven't mentioned, Helen, and I'm sure it's I don't know, but like, it's an expensive course. I'm asking my school to invest a lot to get me trained as a tutor. But the thing is, the money that they're putting in me, then they can get as many as 40 teachers trained per year. Absolutely. If I run this course twice and I do like 15 to 20 teachers, then, that's a huge number of teachers that you can train in your own schools in a short amount of time, using things that we know are research-based and effective. So I think in the long run, it is actually cost-effective.
Yeah, we have many schools who run it in their school networks as well. So if you've got a trained tutor, you've made that investment up front, you're then able to reach your own school and schools within your network. I think it's a powerful model, the train the trainer model in that sense. Yeah,
absolutely. And it makes so much sense, because as you said about having schools within the network, so we are right now thinking of, I've approached our sister school, because as of now, their need is a lot more in terms of teaching and training their teachers. Because they've had an influx of more than 150 expat students recently. And all of them are ELLs and English language learners across secondary and primary. So the teachers are a little bit, what do we do with so many now? So I'm in talk with the principal there to kind of come up with a system that we can start implementing hopefully over this summer and start getting their teachers trained, because that school kind of takes priority right now in terms of all the schools that we have.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of professional development across the whole school, I think it's a very powerful model, the train the trainer model. I also think that going for a whole school approach has a number of really huge benefits that I think, you kind of need to revisit I think firstly it's about how you can optimize outcomes for all students. Research tells us that EAL students need this kind of high challenge, high support, language rich environments to achieve their potential. So we learn the language to which we're exposed, and EAL pupils who are in the mainstream are exposed to a much richer language environment. So having a pedagogy that enables schools to have this where anything that goes on in relation to EAL largely is mainstreamed, is something that will enable the learning to be optimised, not only for those learners, but for everyone across the board. Secondly, I would say in terms of a whole school approach, when EAL learners, when they learn and they succeed alongside their peers, it leads to them having very strong learner identities, which, in other contexts, we've seen that that's not so much the case. So having those strong learner identities in it when it's mainstreamed and you've got this whole school approach. And one thing that I've seen really happen in schools where I've worked is it creates this kind of community of practice within the school, where you've got this consistent shared professional dialogue around teaching and learning, creating this kind of context of continual professional development across all the learning areas. And I think having that really consistent, coherent approach. We have schools where they've got now a meta language. They've got a teaching and learning language for talking about, the way in which they're going to develop pupil skills within curriculum subject disciplines. So it brings a lot together in terms of a really powerful whole school approach. There might be some other things people would be interested in knowing from Srishti in terms of implementation. What's happening now, Srishti, in your school in terms of the course implementation? What's the immediate next step for you?
So the next step for me is I'm coming up with a small presentation that I'll be making to all my HODs across departments, across subjects, and essentially giving them a small experience of how this course or aspects of this course is directly applicable to their subject area. And then hopefully we will be able to nominate a couple of teachers from each department to come and do the teacher course.
Yeah.
And then using the feedback from there, we build from there whether other teachers would like to do the teacher course, whether we want to spread it out. It would depend on how the course is implemented and what they get out of the course. So just a little bit of a slower approach, but making sure that it's done properly.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible way of going about it. And also we've, used that model that you're using where we get subject teachers from different disciplines to be part of a teaching and learning team. So you've got a team of people who are able to drive the pedagogy and the learning across the school. Yes, go for it, Sean.
Hi there. Well, we were just wondering, a lot of our students that we've that started this year, we actually pull out and push in with students from year 1 to year 11, and a lot of these students have been true beginners to English. And we're releasing them when they get to sort of CFR B1 level, but a lot of our students are pre-A1, A1, A2. And like I say, they go down from KG2, which is year 1. So would this course be appropriate for the younger years? Would the strategies be useful for those teachers as well, and for those types of learners that are at the sort of early stages of English language acquisition?
Yeah, so the first module is all about the EAL learner that's in the earlier stages of learning English. So teachers will be shown how in a particular unit of work in a lesson cycle, they might be able to include those learners in that mainstream setting, and some of the key things that they can do in their lessons to enable them to access the content and develop language alongside their peers in mainstream classrooms. So yes, is the answer to that, I would say. Yeah.
If I could add something that might help you, Sean. So what was really incredible about the course is that each strategy or each module has examples from in a primary context and in a secondary context. So you have examples and you have texts that the module works with from that are possibly you're using in your classrooms right now. And you're being taught how to deconstruct them and then find the language notions and then how to teach it to your class, whether it's primary or secondary. And it's got multiple examples, not just one each. So multiple examples for primary setting, multiple examples for secondary setting. And I think that's what was really incredible, because our cohort, we had about 7 to 8 teachers from primary and 7 to 8 teachers from secondary. And we kept whenever we went into small groups to work together, we kept jumping just because we wanted to see how it works in primary, how it works in secondary. So it's definitely helpful for whatever level of learner you have, whichever age group that you have. It's helpful for all of those.
Right. So there are many modules, Sean, where there are options where you can, that didn't exist in the previous course actually. There were, they used to go through the modules and there were some primary examples for some things and secondary examples for other things. But in this course, that there are options of primary and secondary as you move through, so you can make choices and you can either do either or both.
Because I think Mariam said it perfectly at the beginning, that we know that when we pull them out that we're EAL specialists, we're teaching good lessons there, and then they are released into the mainstream and they get a bit lost. And between the three of us, we've offered quite a bit of CPD for strategies for teaching EAL learners this year, but teachers still would like more support, and that's why we're looking at this course, because we think it might be an ideal thing. And the other thing is, we release our students when they're B1 level, but obviously as we know, they're still just B1, and what happens then? At that point, they're not getting any support. That's down to then the teacher to do some adaptive teaching. So I think possibly where this course is going to be beneficial is it would help our teachers to consider those learners too that aren't necessarily qualifying for EAL pullout.
Absolutely. Yes, Mariam, go on.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that I feel like we have really strong EAL, ELL teachers, but I mean, we have a good push-in, pull-out program, but we can't take them the whole day, and it's not good to take them the whole day. And then when they're in the classrooms, some teachers are doing a fantastic job, like accommodating, scaffolding, doing everything. And some teachers are just lost, and they just want you, they want you to identify, they want you to take them, they want you to have more in-class support because they don't know how to deal with it. And I think if we can empower our teachers, our homeroom teachers, our INS teachers, our science teachers, all of them, so that when we get those ELL kids, they're like, oh, okay, I know what to do, and I don't need, Mariam in class with me, or I don't need, the student to be particular, because you're right, after we use the WIDA levels, right? And we release at around a 4. But the thing is, again, there's a whole spectrum of levels just within a 4. So you can get a strong 4, a low 4, a weak 4, and sometimes they are released and they have the basic foundation, but they don't have the academic language yet, but you've released them. So we need to empower our teachers. We really, really do.
What I find with subject teachers is that they're absolutely thrilled when the language of their subject opens up to them, and it's almost as if, certainly in a lot of the schools where I work, there's a big groan when there's any literacy training that's going on, but not with this, because this is so focused on how language works within subject disciplines to make meaning, that teachers, they absolutely love to know more about how language works within their subject and how they can help students to have that same knowledge in terms of their own language development. Science teachers always love the patterns in language. They love to learn about the different patterns in language and scientific explanations, etc. Historians, geographers, teachers across the board in different subject areas find it highly illuminating and really useful and helpful, I would say, in my experience.